It's 3:47 a.m. You're awake, staring at the ceiling, and your thumb is moving across your phone screen, scrolling back through photos of someone who is no longer alive. You can't explain why you're doing it. You just need to see the face. One more time. That need is 5,000 years old, and tonight, in the dark, your hand just proved it. So here's the question. Why does the human mind refuse to accept that a person can simply disappear? And why did one civilization take that refusal so far that they learned to stop a human body from ever rotting away? Let's rewind further than you think. Somewhere in Egypt, around 2500 BC, a man has just died. His family knows what happens next. They have seen it before. Within days, his face will sink. His skin will darken. The smell will come. And then, nothing. He will become unrecognizable, and then he will become soil, and then, eventually, he will become a name that fewer and fewer people remember to say, unless someone intervenes. Now picture this. The people who take his body do not treat it as sacred, untouchable flesh. They cut it open. They remove his organs. They pull his brain out through his nose. They pack his empty torso with powder and sawdust. And somehow, this is the part that breaks your brain. All of that destruction is done in the name of preservation. Read that again. To save him, they dismantled him. That contradiction sat inside Egyptian mummification for 3,000 years, and most of us have never noticed it. We picture mummification as an attempt to freeze a corpse exactly as death left it. It wasn't. The Egyptians were doing something far stranger and far more sophisticated. They weren't preserving a body. They were rebuilding a person. But to understand why they thought a person needed rebuilding, you have to go back even further. Before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, before anyone in Egypt knew how to make a mummy at all, the desert was already making them. Imagine standing at the edge of a shallow grave 6,500 years ago. The body beneath you is curled on its side, and the sand is doing something unexpected. It isn't letting the body rot. The heat pulls the moisture out. The dry air finishes the job. Weeks later, the skin is leather. The hair is still attached. The fingers are still recognizable as fingers. You came to bury someone, and the earth refused to let them go. Now, for a long time, the textbook story said this was the whole origin of mummification. Egyptians saw naturally dried bodies, got the idea, and started copying the desert. It's a tidy story. It's also wrong, or at least far too simple, because when researchers chemically analyzed funerary linen from a site called Mostagetta, they found deliberate embalming mixtures, plant oils, animal fats, conifer resin, aromatic extracts, wax, even petroleum-based material on wrappings dating to as early as 4500 BC. That's over 1,000 years before the first pyramid, before hieroglyphs, before Egypt was even Egypt. Someone, that long ago, was already treating the dead with chemistry. When I first read that study, I had to read it twice, because it means mummification was never an invention. It was an obsession, thousands of years of quiet experimentation, long before anyone wrote down why. And here's the detail that should stop you. Some of those ingredients had antibacterial properties. Some came from conifers that don't even grow in the Nile Valley. These weren't random smears of grease. They were recipes, refined, traded for, passed down. Nature preserved the first bodies. Humans learned to preserve the process. But then something strange happened. As Egyptian burials grew more elaborate, coffins, tombs, sealed chambers, the body was lifted out of the hot sand that had been drying it for millennia. The more they honored the dead, the more they destroyed the very conditions that kept the dead intact. The desert's free miracle was gone, so the embalmers had to become the desert. And that is where things get truly unsettling, because we can now walk into one of their workshops. Almost literally. In 2018, archaeologists working at Saqqara uncovered a mummification facility from around 600 BC, a subterranean chamber where bodies were opened, drained, and treated. And inside it, they found over 100 vessels. 31 of them still held chemical residues. And some of those vessels had labels, instructions. One says, essentially, for the head. Another references the liver. Another, and this is the one that stays with me, was for making the body's odor pleasant. Think about what that means. 2,500 years after someone first dabbed resin on a corpse, embalming had become a science so refined that different organs got different recipes: cedar oil, juniper, pistachio resin, beeswax, heated until it dripped down the outside of the bowl, bitumen. Ingredients imported from hundreds of miles away, combined by specialists who were part chemist, part anatomist, part priest. You feel the heat of the workshop. You smell the resin cutting through something worse underneath. Your hands are slick with oil, and in front of you is not a specimen. It is someone's father. The physical enemy in that room was water. Moisture is what microbes need. Natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, pulled the water out of flesh the way the desert once had. Resins and waxes sealed the surface against the air. The chemistry was real, and it worked. But notice what the chemistry was in service of: not keeping the body whole. The organs were gone. The brain was gone. The body had been gutted, dried, stuffed, and reshaped into something that only resembled the man. Anatomical completeness and personal completeness, the Egyptians had decided, were not the same thing. And that raises a question most people never think to ask. If the body could be taken apart and still count as the person, then what exactly was the person? The Egyptians had an answer, and it's more sophisticated than anything you were taught in school. They did not believe a human was a body plus a soul. That tidy little formula is ours, not theirs. In the Egyptian model, a person was a system. There was the ka, something like your vital essence, the thing that needed to be fed. There was the ba, something closer to your personality, your distinctive self, often shown as a bird with a human head, able to move between worlds. There was your name, your image, your shadow, your heart. And if everything went right, if the rituals were performed, the offerings continued, the body held, all of it fused into something new, an akh, a transformed, effective being, not a ghost, an upgrade. Now look at what they built around that belief. The mummy was the anchor, but around it, a coffin with a painted face, in case the real face failed. Inscriptions carrying the name, in case memory failed. Statues, in case the body failed entirely. Spells, the Book of the Dead wasn't one book. It was a library of roughly 200 spells, and some were written directly onto the mummy's bandages, so the words physically touched the dead. Amulets placed at exact points on the body. And a heart scarab, a stone beetle laid over the heart, inscribed with a plea, "Do not testify against me." That last one matters more than you realize, and we're going to come back to it. For now, just see the architecture. Body, name, image, spell, offering, tomb. Every component is a backup for the others. If one fails, another carries the identity. It is, functionally, fault-tolerant engineering, built not for a machine, but for a human being. Sound familiar? Open your phone. Your face lives in photographs. Your voice lives in voicemails and videos. Your words live in messages. Your relationships live in a contacts list. Your name lives in accounts. You are not in one place either. You never were. Somewhere inside you, this program has been running all along. The quiet understanding that a person exists in pieces, scattered across other people's minds, and the traces they leave behind. The Egyptians just made that truth out of linen and stone, but here's what nobody tells you about building an eternity out of physical things. Every piece of it can be broken. Tombs were robbed, not in modern times, in ancient times, sometimes within living memory of the burial. Coffins were smashed. Wrappings were cut open by men searching for amulets and gold. Names were chiseled away. Bodies that had survived decomposition for centuries were torn apart in minutes. The Egyptians had solved chemistry. They could not solve other humans. And this is where the whole system reveals its deepest vulnerability. Everything, the mummy, the spells, the offerings, the name, depended on the living. The dead could do nothing for themselves. They needed descendants to bring food to the tomb. They needed priests to speak the spells. They needed a civilization to keep standing. Immortality wasn't a state you achieved. It was a service you subscribed to, forever, paid for by people who would eventually forget you existed. Eternity had maintenance costs. So when a tomb was breached, or a dynasty fell, or a family line simply ended, the person didn't die once. They died in pieces. The body might survive while the name vanished. The name might survive in a text while the body turned to dust. Ask any museum curator. There are mummies whose faces are perfectly intact and whose names are gone forever. And there are names carved in stone belonging to bodies no one will ever find. Preservation can defeat decay. It cannot defeat forgetting, which brings us back to you and your phone and the person you were looking at tonight. Because here's what grief researchers have found, studying how modern people actually mourn. When someone dies, your brain doesn't update like a database. The attachment system that kept that person close, the one that expects them at the table, expects their voice, expects their reply, keeps running for months, sometimes for years. You know they're gone. Some older, deeper part of you hasn't accepted it yet, so you keep the sweater. You don't delete the voicemail, you visit the page. Researchers call these continuing bonds, and the surprising finding is that they aren't denial. They're normal. They're how human attachment works. The Egyptians would have recognized this instantly, not because they influenced us, they didn't, but because they were working with the same machinery, the same refusal, the same need for a trace. They just had linen, resin, and stone. You have a server farm and a camera roll, and before you assume your version is permanent, ask yourself who maintains it. A photograph fades, an account gets deleted, a company folds, a password dies with its owner. Your entire archive of a person sits behind a login screen, on hardware with a lifespan shorter than an Egyptian coffin. The stone inscription is still readable after 3,000 years. Your voicemails might not survive your next phone upgrade. You've been carrying this longer than you realize. So, why did the ancient Egyptians turn their dead into mummies? Not because they feared rot. Rot was only the first enemy. The real enemy was disintegration. The way death doesn't take a person all at once, but strips them away in layers. The body goes, the name fades, the image blurs, the role is filled, the story gets told less often. Mummification was one component in a vast, redundant, heartbreaking system built to hold every one of those layers in place at once. A body you could still visit. A face you could still recognize. A name that stayed spoken. A place where the relationship could continue. They weren't preserving meat, they were preserving a person. And maybe that's why we still can't look away from a mummy's face. The horror isn't that it's a corpse. It's that it isn't quite one. The hair is real. The hands are real. 3,000 years after everyone who loved this person died, you can stand in front of them and feel it. This was someone. The consciousness is gone. The language is dead. The gods are silent. And yet the face endures, asking the same question the Egyptians spent 3 millennia trying to answer. When presence becomes absence, where does a person go? You already know your own answer. It's in your pocket right now. A face, a voice, a name in a contacts list you will never delete. Every memory is a small act of preservation. Every story you retell is a strip of linen, and every person you have ever loved exists in more places than their body ever did. The mummy survived because the Egyptians understood something uncomfortable. A human being can disappear in pieces, long before the last piece is gone. And that's why you are the way you are. But there's one piece of this story I deliberately held back. Of everything the embalmers removed, the organs, the moisture, even the brain, one thing was almost always left inside the body. Protected, spoken to, pleading with, even. The Egyptians believed this single organ carried your entire moral identity, and that after death, it could stand up and testify against you. The strange part is what modern science has learned about it since. That's a story for next time. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to BackTimes, hit the bell icon, and share this video with someone who loves history.